back to Morning Joe. The emails keep flooding in, and it seems now that people are not so concerned about Senator Vitter having sex with prostitutes, be they in Washington or New Orleans. They're a lot more concerned about Wendy Vitter's choice of attire yesterday. Her dress, it was.
You know,
it's like, get off the lady. She has enough problems as is. But yeah. It was a curious selection, but we're going to leave it there. We have Tina Brown on the phone. Absolutely. I don't mean to sound like Larry King. Absolutely the best in the business. Just a real trailblazer in publishing. Tina, I wanted to ask you about the Bancroft family, talking about Murdoch. It seems to me they're sitting here and they're going back and forth, and they're pacing, and they're sweating, and they're wringing their hands and saying, well, we'll give him a little bit of authority, and we'll give him the paper, but we're going to maintain control on the board. Murdoch doesn't play that way, does he?
No, I think it's preposterous and hilarious and pitiful of the Bancrofts, quite frankly. I mean, you know, why don't they just cash their check and shut up? I mean, they're going to sell the paper. They also want to have some great sort of moral probity award for doing it at the same time. The fact is, they're cashing out, and they should just get on with it, because that's what they're going to do. It always happens. I mean, Rupert is absolutely brilliant about showing up, you know, wearing a mourning suit when somebody dies, you know, if you know what I mean, or coming with a bunch of flowers as a suitor.
Yeah.
I mean, he's romanced the Bancrofts, and of course the most brilliant thing that he did, I mean, it was to take out the CEO, Zanino, and basically look him in the eye and say to him, you know, I want to buy the Dow Jones. And then, of course, you see that he has a $25 million parachute if he gets fired. Well, since he will get fired within a few days, Zanino has got himself a wonderful deal here. I mean, who wouldn't want to persuade the family to sell? You know, I mean, ultimately, the Bancrofts want their check. And in any situation where you have multiple members of a family, no will ever agree. It's one of the reasons that newspapers never stay in a family, because quite honestly, if you have more than one or two kids, they're not going to agree. One kid will always want to sell because they'll have a family situation or a husband who didn't make any money, and they'll say, "Come, why don't we just cash out? You know, why don't we just get the money?" And that's what they will do. And so for them to start saying they want to keep editorial control is absurd. Rupert shouldn't let them have editorial control. Why would he pay all that money and allow them to do it? But of course, he won't abide by any of the stuff that he agrees to. One of the, you know, my husband was editor of the London Times, and I must certainly declare that interest because Rupert fired him. But he fired him having said, you know, that, you know, the national directors at the time, just like the Wall Street Journal are proposing, were supposed to be consulted and so on. But of course, you know, ultimately, as Rupert said at the time, those guarantees are not worth the paper they're printed on. You know, he will do what he wants, and in some ways you could argue, well, he's paid a huge amount of money, he should be allowed to do what he wants.
Well, I mean, of course, that's the case, and I remember reading in Time magazine, Rupert said they want to take all my money and maintain control. That's
Absolutely.
not how it works. But you bring up the Times of London, one of the most esteemed, if not the most esteemed newspaper in the world, and certainly in the past when your husband was running it. Do we look at the history of the Times of London and the arc since Murdoch took over that esteemed newspaper and project that out for the Wall Street Journal? How is it doing now after Rupert Murdoch's got his hands on it?
Rupert did some wonderful things when he bought the Times. He beat the unions, for which I greatly admire him, because the unions were strangling that paper, and he very, very bravely kind of, you know, faced them down and won, and that's a great service he did to British journalism, because it liberated the press from union stranglehold and allowed a lot of newspapers to begin. But, you know, the journalism did greatly change. I mean, if you see the paper now, it is, you know, far more sort of tabloid in a lot of its content, and of course, ultimately, it's not so much that Rupert gives orders about what he wants in the paper, it's just that everybody knows exactly which line to toe, and they do, you know, and it's one of those things. I mean, you don't have to legislate you know, for things to be there. It would be naive to say that Rupert comes storming down into a newsroom and says, I want this. It's not how it operates. But ultimately, you hire the people you know are on the same page, and that's where it changes.
And people know exactly what he wants. And you talk about family newspapers. The New York Times has had an awful lot of problems over the past several years, not only financially but also journalistically. Do you expect in the end they will have to sell out to somebody also?
Well, I tremendously hope not. I mean, one of the great reasons that frankly, the Washington Post and the New York Times are as good as they are is that, you know, they are held by a family who still have a great desire to see the news in a way that has been traditional in their family, which is that it is something of a national a trust with the public. And I still believe that for news to be truly truthful and objective, you really do need that commitment to a value. If it's all driven by the bottom line, you are not going going to get journalism of stature, and that's a fact. And in the end, stature is the DNA of these papers. The only thing I will say is it's not about being pretty that these papers have to stay good. The DNA of the brand is quality. It's like, what is the point in a paper like the Wall Street Journal or the Times unless you believe it? Its authority is its brand. So when you lessen that authority, you ultimately weaken the brand. So it's not smart business to weaken the objective power and the authority of a newspaper.
I mean, and again, I disagree with half the editorials of the New York Times, but it's actually the first paper I read every morning. I've got to read it because it does. You're exactly right. It's got that authority. It's got that brand, and that's what so many people are concerned about.
What would we do without their Iraq coverage? Ultimately, the Times foreign coverage is absolutely superb. It's what I read. Like, I gobble it up, because I know it's going to have that authority. I don't want to have that stuff coming from an area. I mean, there are plenty of smart blogs out there, but until I have identified the collection of blogs that I truly believe have got the same stature, reporting and checking standards, because these journalism, it's checked, and there's somebody rejecting it and firing you if it's wrong.
Well, you look at the war reporting of Dexter Filkins out of Fallujah in I get that early 2005.
He's a great journalist, and John Burns, and they're all
John Burns.
Guys.
When John Burns this past weekend talking about if anybody else had written about Anbar Province and things actually turning around a bit in Anbar Province, I think I would have rolled my eyes. Most people would have rolled their eyes. But he writes this amazing article, and then he goes in and he writes with nuance, talks about what chaos there is in Baghdad and these areas where the surge is supposed to be working. And, it really is. It is remarkable reporting.
It is remarkable reporting. And, you feel sorry that, the only thing I think is completely unfair, it has been in the last few years, and the administration has kept on deriding journalists as distorting the situation. Because the truth of the matter is that, 130 journalists have died reporting this story. And they have nothing in it to be lying about it. They really want it to come right themselves. They're dying as a result.
Yeah, no doubt about it. No doubt about it. Hey, Tina, finally, I remember following the coverage after Princess Diana died. Wanted to ask you where you were when you heard that she'd passed away, and just, again, 10 years later, what are you going to be thinking on the 10-year anniversary?
Well, I was in my house in Long Island when I heard she died. I was called by a journalist from CNN, and they said at 5 in the morning, and they said, can you share your memories of Diana? Because I did have lunch with Diana in the July before she died, 6 weeks before she died. And I thought, what the hell's he calling for me at 5 o'clock in the morning? And then, of course, he said Diana is dead, and I was absolutely shattered along with everybody else, because I lunched with her in the July, as I say, of that year, and she was a woman, I felt, on the verge of a wonderful second act. She was confident, she was excited that Tony Blair had won the election, she thought that Blair was going to give her a mission, sort of being ambassador for England. She did have a lot of dismay and sadness about her marriage still, and kept saying to me, it was sad, she said to me, I dread August. And I said, why do you dread August, Diana? And she said, I dread August because, she said, it's when all the kids go to Balmoral and I'm on my own. And she said, people think that I have such a great life, but she said, who's going to date me? I have so much baggage. Anyone who dates me is in the middle of a press mania. And she said, men of any substance don't want to have to deal with the publicity and the craziness that goes with me. Well, of course, they were very prescient words, because she was really at a loose end, she accepted the Mohammed Al-Fayed invitation to France. And ironically, Joe, she really accepted that invitation for the saddest of reasons. She believed he would offer protection. She thought that going with the Fayeds would mean there were planes, helicopters, bodyguards, that she would have a nice protected time where she could get over her heartache about Dr. Hasnat Khan, who'd just given her up, and Prince Charles had just given a birthday party for Camilla at Highgrove, which really hurt her feelings, and she was feeling immensely wounded. And she went off there for protection. And the awful part was, of course, that in the end, the Fayeds created their own mayhem. They were publicity hounds, and they were always tipping off the press where they were. And she herself had a great fatal attraction for the press. She couldn't resist posing for the camera, so she was always in this kind of dance of death in the end with the press. And ultimately, fleeing them, posing for them, it led to the last tragic incidents in the tunnel. So I felt huge sadness that the woman I met at lunch wasn't allowed to flower in the way that she sort of had a mind to, and that in the end, her private insecurities and her longing for love always torpedoed her in the end.
Well, and I'll tell you, I as much as I thought I followed this story, I had no idea about the Pakistani doctor, and what a sad story that was that you detail, and so much more in the Diana Chronicles. Tina Brown, I can't thank you enough for being with us. Thank you so much. That was great. Isn't that fascinating? Diana Brown, I could talk to her for 3 years.
She's a smart lady.
That's one way to put it. Yeah, trailblazer in the publishing world. She is a smart lady. Just fascinating story about not only Princess Diana. I haven't gotten all the way through the book. Have been reading the book in spots, and it's a great book. It's great. And I said we have Zach Wamp.